covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters, we should rise and fall together, and that's why.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday morning. It is Monday, the start. Well, we never have a day off. I was going to say it's the start to the work week, but with everything going on, obviously, we don't take time off. Although I'll admit this weekend I did step away from my type A proclivities and chill the hell out because even my husband staged an intervention. I was getting a little stressed by everything that's going on and just the complete lack of empathy from neighbors. And we have a lack of civic education on basic things like what the Constitution covers. So I got a little frustrated by that and stressed out, as well as all the headlines that continue to go on, as well as what's happening to protesters on day 7. So I commend everyone out there who is standing up, gathering in place from small little towns in parks to big cities like here in Chicago. Still can't get to the city on the train. So there were a lot of events out in the suburbs and I was so pleased to see it. But before we get into all of that, let me welcome our lovely and talented Canadian co-host, Mr. Andy Kennedy.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Doing okay. Yeah.
My husband sent me a message that on Saturday he found you in the closet with a pitchfork and an unlit Molotov cocktail. So I said, maybe it's time for an intervention.
It was actually a little bit worse than that. So here's what I did this weekend. There is this common misconception that people on the left or left of center are anti-Second Amendment. And nothing could be further from the truth. So I myself, in Illinois, you have to have a firearms owner identification card. So I made sure that mine was up to date. And then I went through what I have on hand. And I was a little surprised. I was pretty sure that we were reasonable. The number of firearms that we currently have is excessive. And that made me feel a little bit better. So
Good morning, Keanu Reeves from the Matrix.
That's kind of what it was like. So this week I will be brushing up on my marksmanship and going to the gun range. I was part of, there was a bipartisan gun club and it was so cute. It was named Both Barrels because the whole idea was that we would get together with conservatives and partake of a hobby that we loved, and that was putting holes in little paper targets and just having a good time with it. And at my preferred gun range, the gentleman who runs it is a retired Marine, so everybody just calls him Gunny. And he himself is just such a wonderful person. And he cut us discounts and deals. And what we were doing was educating people on safety. So if you're terrified of them, or if you're on the left and you want to ban them all, we would invite you to this, it was like a 90-minute safety training course. And what happened was we had people who were terrified and curious, but by the end of the session, you go through this intensive training and all the Q&A, and we talked about how reloading works because at the time we were having some pretty high profile mass shootings. So the common things that come from politicians about how, here's what's going to work, we knew were complete and utter bullshit. It was pandering. So it was nice to be able to go through all of that with people who had been advocating for a total ban. And then what invariably would happen is after the training course, they'd have this aha moment like, yeah, these proposals are absolute bullshit. And then we go down to the shooting range, and everybody would get their choice of handgun. And we just have a great time with putting holes in paper targets. So it was a nice way to bridge this gap, not only between personalities and political ideology, but education, because I think it's a myth that lawful gun owners don't have some really good proposals that would address gun violence. But the left's not listening to him, and frankly, the right's not listening to him either. So it becomes one of those wedge issues that politicians use just to whip up their base, and it happens on the left and the right. And it's unfortunate because we are not making adequate progress because of that. So anyway, that was my soapbox moment. But so my husband saw me taking inventory, and one of the pieces needs a new stock on it. It's cracked, so I'm going through and making sure everything's sound and in order. That at that point he was like, okay, and he's from Southern Indiana, so he's all about Second Amendment stuff. Even he was like, okay, you need to go take a hot bath. So
Leave your guns here.
that's exactly right. You don't need that with you. So yeah, so that was kind of my weekend, because I think part of it is at what point are people going to say enough with the brutality, right? So we keep seeing over and over again unarmed peaceful protesters being beaten and killed by police officers. These are people who are meant to, well, they take an oath to uphold the law. And for some reason, they have been told that this is acceptable, and it's being reinforced because they are not held accountable. And
apparently there's a prerequisite that you have to belong to a white supremacist group and have the tattoo to prove it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's what's going on, and it's very troubling to see. So I'm not sure where this goes. So I don't know. That, and you talk about the white supremacists. We see them lining up along parade routes and things like this with their assault weapons. And truly, that's a method of intimidation. That's meant to intimidate. And for some reason, they are getting the impression that protesters are looters, despite the FBI, despite all of these organizations saying, no, it's not the protesters, it's these small contingents of white supremacists, of agitators who are doing the looting. In fact, we have video of police officers doing it. So
if the hammer fits.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So just on that note, real quick shout out to whoever came up with this snarky and hilarious idea to start a Facebook group for the Antifa Corporation. If you get a chance, go out and take a look, do a search for Antifa Corporation, and they have done a parody page for the George Soros funded Antifa Incorporated. So it's absolutely hilarious.
And apparently you don't want to mess with HR.
No, you got Lily in HR who is she's rough. Don't cross her in any way, shape, or form. So
I believe the term is tough but fair.
I would say fair, but off the chart tough. So yeah. So what's going on with you, Andy?
I'm enjoying both a psychological and physiological um, break from back pain and anxiety-induced withdrawal symptoms from medication that I knew nothing about that apparently I was taking. So I spent the weekend attempting to sleep it off. So the weekend went very quick because I wasn't awake very much. It was very strange. And then I started looking into it because I went to one of the two hospitals I went to while I was convalescing, I'll use your word. They put me on this nerve pain medication called Lyrica. And Lyrica sounds really nice, Lyrica, it's very lyrical sounding. And I don't know if it's doing me any good or not, but I was taking it, for a month. And then when I felt better, and I, typically don't like being on any meds. And for the most part, I haven't taken anything through most of my life. And that's the way I like it. So I just stopped. And apparently the Lyrica that I was taking needs to be weaned out of your system slowly, or else you're going to feel withdrawals that are reminiscent of trying to get off heroin. So that was my weekend.
Well, I'm glad that you are now on the road to recovery in more than just one way. So that's good. So let's get into our topics today. So we are going to touch a little bit on the police brutality, which is just horrific. For those who are not students of history, you would have heard corporate oligarchs on the news when Sanders still had his campaign active, calling someone like me a brown shirt because I wanted, people not to die because they couldn't get access to health care and livable wages. So that particular comment shows not only extreme ignorance of history and what actually happened, but it's a complete denigration of the suffering of people all around the world as well as in this country. So the police brutality that you see, that looks like brown shirts. And in fact, what I started to see over the weekend was police force talking heads, whether it was the chief of police or somebody in city council, saying that, well, they're just following orders. And that struck me because that is called the Nuremberg defense. I am just following orders. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, kind of a light went on. We have the militarization of our police force, not just in the United States, but everywhere. And in the US, we know that they are being trained by Israeli forces in the same tactics that are used in Gaza and occupied Gaza. So what the things that they're doing to Palestinian protesters are now being seen on the streets in the United States. So now it starts to make sense. So you have this militarization of equipment, mindset, and training for what used to be community policing. And we're seeing that played out now in peaceful protests. So officers are being trained and it's being reinforced that they are literally going to war with enemies and terrorists. Now, who are the enemies and terrorists in this scenario? It's us, right? So it's for them to use that excuse, I'm just following orders. Now we get into this weird situation where military tribunals and courts in The Hague have said that that is not a viable defense. You cannot follow an unjust order, an order that requires you to violate civil and human rights. But for our police forces, who are now hiding behind civic law, the United States law, local law, they believe they can get away with that particular defense. So I wrote an article and we published it on our website this weekend. And let me post the link out here to our peoples about this particular scenario, because it begs a question: where do we fall? And maybe we need to have lawyers back on to talk about this, because they're acting on behalf of militarization, but yet the civil courts have not caught up. So where do we draw the line here? And that I think is a relevant question that we need to answer, because we have proposals coming out, in particular from the Democratic Party, that that in my view are a poor substitute for what actually needs to happen. And that I think is a problem, because I think the Democratic policy, even on a good day, without all this militarization, falls far short. And I want to talk about that. But in the context of, you have this police force who is, you know, when you show up in riot gear, you're gonna have a riot. And we saw this nationwide in, like, Warren Lynch posted about Malden, where the police chief took the stance of solidarity on the protest issue, and that Black lives obviously haven't mattered, and we need to take a good look at that, and we need to support all Americans. They didn't have an issue. But all across the country, where you had the police show up in riot gear, and particularly in Louisville, Kentucky, you have deaths and mayhem and abuse and beatings, and people who will be scarred for life because they've been shot with these rubber bullets and incendiaries and things like that. So you're gonna get what you plan for, and we see that they are actually not just planning for it, but in some cases they want this. They absolutely want it. And I think, Andy, you said it best. It's almost a prerequisite now to have white supremacists in what we're doing. So,
well, and it's hiding in plain sight too, right? Like, I mean, that's the most troubling thing of all is that, at least before this time that we're in right now, there is at least some amount of trying to hide it. Right? And it's happening in plain sight, and everybody's got a video camera, and it's almost like the police forces are like, okay, well, we just don't care anymore. We're just going to do it, right? This is like, our time might be coming to an end, so let's just have as much fun as we can, you know, firing at pregnant people or macing kids or whatever. Right? Just like the good old days before it comes to an end.
right. Well, and to your point, yeah, we have cell phone cameras, but they're still, in some cases, still trying to hide it, because cell phone video is coming out now where they're dragging a protester behind a corner or down an alley and trying to beat them without being seen. So kudos to the people who follow when we are separated and someone follows and catches it on video. What they're doing is not just wrong, but it's evil. And for my Christians out there, evangelical to whatever, the definition of evil is pretty simple. If I do something that is wrong, and I know it's wrong, that's bad. But when I encourage other people to do it, that's evil. That is the definition of evil, and it's pretty simple. So what we're seeing now is officers and their commanders, in some cases governors, city managers, things like that, are actively promoting evil. And that's where we're at. So let's look at the response from Democrats in Congress who believe that they have a viable solution, and this is going to be unveiled today. So this is the Justice Act of 2020, and the major points. Now, the text has not been posted to congress.gov, so Anyone who's looking for the actual language of a piece of legislation can go to congress.gov. I would say don't listen to the headlines or what they tell you it is. Read what it actually is. Because oftentimes, especially Republicans are good for this, they'll name it like the freedom and blah, 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 and what it actually does is the opposite. So that's important. So here are the provisions that we should expect to hear about today. Justice in Policing Act of 2020. So they have 5 different tenets to this bill. First one is to make it easier to sue cops for bad behavior. Second is a national police misconduct registry. Third is a ban on chokeholds. Fourth is to limit the transfer of military equipment to police. And fifth is to make lynching a federal crime. So we're going to go through this one by one, and we'll start with the first one. Make it easier to sue cops for bad behavior. All right, Andy. Can you foresee any issues with making it easier to sue an individual officer for bad behavior?
Not at all, unless you've got $200,000 in the bank.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was the first thing I thought. So for those who are not aware of my background, I used to own a small woman-owned business with my business partner. And we did marketing and communications for small businesses. And then on occasion, if it was a progressive candidate, we would do in-kind donations to that candidate through collateral, their signs, website design, things like that. Well, my own Democratic Party members decided that they didn't like that. And they came out after us, not our candidate, after us. And they started what they call a whisper campaign, and we were blacklisted. And then later we found out this is what they meant by the DCCC blacklist policy. So they completely ruined our business. And in doing so, committed 5 felonies. Well, you would think committing a felony means that your local police department, your sheriff's office, and your state attorney's office would step in and help you. No. That's not how it works. So we had quite an education with the legal process and how things actually work. So between back and forth from my local police department and the sheriff's office who refused to touch it, our local state's attorney who refused to touch it, that is when we started to see that there was collusion between the Republican elected officials and my Democratic Party. First clue that maybe there isn't a two-party system, or as Don calls it, the binary system. So then, after about $40,000, and they kept stalling and trying to run up the bill, we started to run out of money. And now this was our savings from the business, our revenue, all of this. So at the end, I still owe an attorney, and we never got our day in court. And that was just suing three or four people in my own party for criminal wrongdoing. Criminal wrongdoing that they freely admit to. We have on video. We've got all. It was never a question, did they? They did, and they admit it. It was, we never got a chance to go to court. So now let's assume that you are, you've been in the hospital, police abuse. So now you've got medical bills. You probably don't have insurance. Maybe you do, but you still have medical bills. You're out of work, maybe on disability, maybe you've lost your job entirely, and you're expected to put up at least $30,000 to $60,000 to mount a legal case against an officer. So let's keep in mind that you get a defender in criminal court. What Democrats are proposing is that you make a civil case. So no one gives you an attorney for free. And everyone always told us, get pro bono, pro bono. No, it doesn't work like that either, because if you're a lawyer, like our own lawyer said to us, look, I still need to practice and have a business here in the States. So We need to be real cautious. And of course they put pressure on him. So now you're asking an attorney to operate for free and potentially risk their practice and renewal of their license to go after a cop for you, when we still have district attorneys and all of these others who are too terrified or unwilling to hold them accountable today and can.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right. So Democrats did the same thing. They sided with Republicans in gutting the Americans with Disability Act. So that passed 2 years ago, and we had a number of Democratic Congress members here in Illinois and across the country who sided with Republicans to do the same thing for disabled people. So now, instead of federal and state money to retrofit businesses so that someone in a wheelchair can get access to the building, now you as a disabled person, disabled vet, whatever, you have to mount your own litigation in order to sue the business. So we see that they did it once before. Nobody said anything. There weren't enough disabled people who understood it, not enough veterans, and totally fine. Now they're doing it again, and they're doing it against people who, like, we can barely afford an extra $400 or $500 in unexpected expense per month, but now you're supposed to do this lawsuit. They're so completely tone deaf and out of touch with reality. I think that by making this case and this proposal, it just completely highlights their lack of understanding in where we are today.
You're talking that most lawmakers come from the lawyer field, right? So all the lawyers that they've always worked with through their entire careers are all mostly still lawyers that, you know, would absolutely love to take your case if you have money to, you know, go to court. And so it's just another way for friends looking at the frame.
Exactly right. So let's I think we could go on for days about that first one. So National Police Misconduct Registry. All right. So we have, let's say, Officer Smith, who has done something. He's been censured. Maybe he's still being paid on the police force. He's on paid leave, whatever. His name goes on a registry. Okay. So for this one, I'm not really going to take an argument on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the Brevard County Sheriff's Office to make my case for me. So let me put this up here. So this is Brevard County in Florida. This is on the Sun Coast, just below and around Patrick Air Force Base, near Cocoa Beach and in Melbourne. And in fact, the officer, Mr. Fluffenstuffs, I call him, he wrote this post for Brevard County and thought it was freaking hilarious. So for those who aren't aware, in Buffalo, there were two officers who shoved a peace protester, 75 years old, shoved him to the ground so hard his head hit the concrete, he got a concussion, his skull split, blood everywhere. And when other protesters tried to reach him, they were beaten. And they walked past him and left him there. This particular gentleman has survived so far, the 75-year-old. These two officers who did this were put on, I think it was paid leave, or I'm not sure exactly if they were fired or not. I think it was paid leave while it's being investigated. So then 57 of their colleagues, in solidarity with the police officers, resigned from the special task force. So they are all still employed by the Buffalo Police Department. And everybody was cheering their solidarity. These are the people who said all lives matter, when in fact we now know it's not that all lives matter. They just are siding with police brutality. So that's what was going on in Buffalo. In Atlanta, you had the police officers who were pulling students out of cars, broke windows. Now, these students did nothing. They were not at a protest, nothing. They walked past a car of white students, went to a car of black students, broke the windows, pulled them out, tased them, beat them, and hit them with pepper spray. Those officers are also on paid administrative leave. Some were fired. So here you have a call out from the sheriff's office in Melbourne, Florida, Brevard County, saying, hey, Buffalo and Atlanta, we're hiring in Florida. Lower taxes, no spineless leadership, or dumb mayors rambling on at press conferences. Plus, we got your back. And they tagged it Law and Order Florida and moved to where you are. And then below that, and they loved this, they thought it was so great, they pinned it to their page. And below that, they say, Minneapolis officers, we will not disband our LE agencies or give in. We are hiring in Florida. So once again, they're calling out to these officers who have already violated constitutional rights and bringing them to Florida. So this is what will happen for your registry. Not a goddamn thing. And let me tell you, I know this area really well. Melbourne, Florida. My mom, my stepdad lived there. I've been there a number of times, and it is probably one of the most openly racist areas. So before you come at me, people, not everybody, of course, but there aren't enough of you standing up against it. So when I moved back to the United States, I was in Melbourne, Florida. And this is part of when I got my shocking re-education into what really happens in the United States. I met this nice gentleman while I was working, young guy, young black guy, and we just kind of hit it off and would hang out and things like that. And he just told me matter-of-factly that the police in Melbourne would routinely drive around, pick him up, take him behind a store, and beat the shit out of him. And, you know, as a person who grew up overseas, I was so shocked by this. And he would say things like, well, what can I do? And he was just so defeated. But he was right. There's no advocacy when the people in authority are coming after you. And here we see the sheriff's office, who works in conjunction with Patrick Air Force Base to patrol outside those roads, the beaches and all of these sort of things, where they're openly taunting and making fun of police brutality. So this is the answer to your registry. They don't give a shit.
Sure. No, it'd be probably in a lot of cases a badge of honor to be on this registry, kind of like the way progressives who are, you know, that are on Twitter celebrate being blocked by New York Candy.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. So it's a joke. So for me to see the Democratic establishment, these elites, think that this is a viable proposal, once again shows how out of touch they really are with what's going on here in the streets, on Main Street, as we say. No, this registry isn't going to do a damn thing. Not at all. So let's go on to the next little jewel that's being offered here. Ban chokeholds. Now this one, when I saw this, I actually snorted my coffee on this one, because it goes back to, if you don't know what's going on, then anybody could sell you a bill of goods that is absolute bullshit. So the first time we saw this ban chokeholds, it came out of Minneapolis. And I think it was the mayor, I'm not sure if it was the mayor or the governor, said that we're going to ban chokeholds. And I hate to tell everybody, but in doing the research I did for one of the articles I wrote a couple of weeks ago, Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota already has a ban on chokeholds. They've had it for years. So when they put this out and nobody balked, when they say, almost as if it's a new idea, we're going to ban chokeholds, and nobody challenged them, it to me was like, oh, nobody's aware that he's bullshitting you.
Well, and the chokehold, you know, suggests that using your forearm, right, to go under the neck of someone and hold them in place, right? But when a a chokehold doesn't typically mean your knee, which is, what killed George Floyd. And so you want to get technical. Well, it's not really a chokehold because it used my leg.
Well, and that's exactly it. So chokeholds in Minneapolis were banned, but putting your knee on someone's neck or kneeling on their chest, totally acceptable. Absolutely acceptable and within rights. So we also saw this with Manuel Ellis in Tacoma, Washington. They did the exact same thing to him. The exact same thing. They kneeled on his neck, and he has died from asphyxiation. And the coroner report shows it. They suffocated this man who had no weapons, was not a threat, was actually engaged in a civil conversation with police officers who decided that they were going to kill him for it. Right? So this is
it's so horseshit, right? Like, I mean, how do you define a choke? Right? Like, I mean, if you have somebody's arm in there with your neck, in wrestling, it's called a half Nelson, right? If you have both their arms and their neck pinned by your arms, it's a full Nelson. If you have somebody pinned by their guitar, it's a Ricky Nelson, right? So, it's
pinned by the guitar. What? What? Where did you go? What was that? A Ricky Nelson?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I
No, it's all right. But
don't put me on the registry.
So so this is the Democratic elite giving you piecemeal, non-effective, and I guarantee it, they're going to come out with all the fanfare today. So I want you to be aware of exactly what they're proposing. So that's the chokehold thing. So yay us. They'll kill you in some other way. So after chokeholds, this one I thought was just tremendous. Limit the transfer of military equipment to police. It says limit the transfer of military equipment to police. So here is a really nice example of where money talks. They didn't say ban, they didn't say stop, they didn't say end, they said limit. So instead of 20 billion, we're only going to do 2 billion. We're only going to give...
No, I think what it means is as soon as you've got as much as you need, then that's it.
As much as you need today, tomorrow come back again.
Sure.
Right? So...
Yeah.
So in some of the research that I did over these articles, and I'm not trying to boast about my research and writing. My hope is that mine is just a start and we all build from each other. But on Progressive Insider, there are a couple of articles that I put out in the last few days because these things are actually kind of right in themselves. And one of them was this notion, and it came from Intercept, it's come from Common Dreams. Everybody's taking a look at how we're training our police force. And again, we're training them with paramilitary groups. So there's this really nice photo shot of 2016, the Anti-Defamation League. It had a promotional video for the National Counterterrorism Seminar in Israel. Let me repeat that. The National Counterterrorism Seminar that was hosted in Israel. So we're taking our police officers and sending them to counterterrorism school in Israel. So these are select senior U.S. law enforcement officers who go there to learn about fighting terror. And then they come back to our cities and our communities and they look for terror.
Right. With PTSD.
Right. Well, yeah. So
brand new tattoos.
They're looking for us, is what they're looking for, which is why we're seeing such a disproportionate violent response to peaceful protesters right now. So my question back to Democratic elite is, what limit? What limit are we going to do? Because I would think, now if I were queen for a day, I want community policing And if you can't, we're going to get rid of your police force and we're going to start over. I want community policing like they have in other parts of the world where if I need help, I call you. You're not sitting on a street corner waiting for somebody to screw up, right? We have fully funded you as necessary. Maybe you're not going to be able to buy the tank that you want, but I'll get you a nice police vehicle and I'll make sure that you have bulletproof vests and things like this. We'll take care of you the same way we do with our firefighters who don't get enough credit nor enough equipment. But that is the baseline. And then I want to train my National Guard in counterterrorism. That's what they're for. They've already been trained in military style combat. They have the equipment. Let's get them the training they need so that they are our ready force should we need them for a terrorism incident. I don't want my police officer looking at me like a terrorist. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but that's kind of how I feel about it. And you know, if you have a different idea, post it in the chat. Andy, where am I wrong?
Well, I don't. I just find it hard to understand why such goofy parts of this list would be put up by true progressives like Kamala Harris, Ice Cream Pelosi. You know, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Now, granted, Kamala Harris did say that we're going to crack down on police brutality, but if we catch you skipping school, it's rubber bullets and tear gas.
Yeah, she's going after the tough criminals, the tough, hardened criminals, the, you know. Truancy.
It even sounds bad.
It does. It does. That is such a scary thought. So thank you, Senator Harris, for your, I can't even pretend. It's not leadership. I don't know what it is. So, so that's your military equipment transfer, which, by the way, you're paying for out of public funds. So this last one, the year is 2020, right? The Justice and Policing Act of 2020. Make lynching a federal crime. Isn't it already? How did we miss this? Right, because lynching is the terror is introducing an element of terror and torture in an attempt to murder someone. I'm pretty sure that that's already a federal crime.
Is it though? Because I would want to ask that there are going to be different states that are going to be more favorable for a crime of that nature than, say, places like Mississippi or Atlanta, you know, where there is more of a stronger NRA and KKK presence, right? Like, I mean, is it federal or is it on the state level? Like, is that a legitimate question? A Canadian is asking. So if that's a silly question, then my apologies. But
no. So the way it's supposed to work in the states, and this is where your state's attorney, district attorney becomes important. And as we saw with Amy Klobuchar, who completely failed her city in Minneapolis by refusing to do her job and uphold this. So you have a basic crime. If I attempt to murder someone, you have, you know, first, second, and third degree. Those are governed by the state and how they choose to assign, you know, the charge. If I introduce a racial slur, or I talk to somebody, if I introduce a racial slur or something derogatory about their gender, their religion, things like that, now it becomes a hate crime, and that's federal. So let's just presuppose lynching someone. let's say that the Arbery case was a lynching. So now we have to define, do you need a rope and do you need to hang them the way that was traditional done? Or what was forgive me for forgetting his name, but Michael something or other, who was tied by the neck to the back of a pickup truck and drug across dirt and gravel roads until his body was completely dismembered. So are you going to that finite definition that a rope must be involved for this particular law? Or do we not already have laws that pertain to hate crimes at a federal level? So if I attempt to murder you or I succeed, then I have that charge, and if I can add a component on there that violates race, sexual orientation, gender, all of those protected classes, now it's a hate crime, and that's a federal. So I'm not sure why we are arguing about lynching being illegal. It's already fucking illegal. So this is what boggles my mind, and now you have somebody like Rand Paul, of all people, deciding that he's going to stop this bullshit legislation, and not for a good reason. He wants to make sure that that law is limited to right before the point of death or after the point of death. So I could take, and we saw this, I forget what state it was, children took a black classmate, put a rope around his neck, and started pulling. And I can't recall if they actually got his feet off the ground, but they were playing at lynching this little boy. So according to Rand Paul, that this law would not apply unless the child had was near death and needed emergency room intervention to save his life. And in this case, the child did not. His mother found out about it and whooped some ass. And we saw the pictures of the kid with burn marks, rope burn marks on his neck. So this law would not apply in that situation, according to what Rand Paul wants. So we are wasting precious time and energy arguing for something that is not necessary. We just need to actually take seriously the laws that we already have on the books and work on our state prosecutors, our DAs, our district attorneys, and our state's attorneys to take this seriously. I mean, I don't understand why this is such a problem for people. Either we're people or we're not. And the way that the law is being applied right now is some of us aren't actually people. Corporations are. But it depends on your color and your class, whether you, as a living, breathing individual, actually qualify as human. And that is what we're arguing.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, as the minute that I found out about this particular, you know, police song and dance act policy thing, I looked up who was bringing it forward, and that's all I needed to do, right? Because, you know, nowhere is anyone from, you know, the squad anywhere near this. So this is just, of course, a neoliberal establishment. Let's make it sound good so that people think that we're actually doing something when it's not actually doing anything.
Right. Okay. So we have a comment in from a lovely viewer, Azalea. So Azalea writes in, and she's got a couple questions here. So one of them is she's asking if, number one, how do we get Trump to resign? And number two, her proposal is, if she says, I wonder if a lot of the problems will go away if Trump is removed from office. How can he still be in office after calling the military against unarmed peaceful protesters? How can our own government not protect people? So, Azalea, I love you, and you're wonderful, and thank you for watching. And I I feel so badly that I am about to tell you something that is going to be disheartening. So what I would suggest to you is about use of the military against the American people. There is a long history and precedent where this has happened. I would suggest to you, just do a Google search, times the military has gone against American people. And one of those you will find is after World War One. We had the Veterans Army. It was a group of veterans who were starving during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And we had promised these veterans money after a certain amount of time. And because they were starving and out of work and disabled, they wanted that money now. And so what we did was Douglas MacArthur, a war hero, was called in to remove all of these veterans from an encampment where they were protesting, and he shot them all. So that's just one of 5 times in recent modern history where the military has come against the American people. So we have a long history of it. And then we have this really horrific cadence in Black American history where we've done it to Black communities over and over and over. In Philadelphia, we bombed an apartment building. We've dropped a literal bomb on an apartment building because there were Black people in it that were sheltering in place and we didn't like it. Then there's the story of Black Wall Street in Tulsa where we massacred an entire town. And that was vigilante and police that were involved in that too. So there is a great deal of precedence here. Now, as to your question, getting Trump out, I want to caution people that, while yes, that is absolutely what we want to do, this idea that getting Trump out somehow magically makes everything better is a dangerous idea. And right. So
let's remember why we got Trump in the first place. Because of the situation in the United States that made it possible for what's the nicest way to put this? A reality TV host to become president of the United States, when the only other possibility was status quo, right? The same old that goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan. And that's the real problem, right? That's the problem with the vote blue no matter who crowd, right? That's the problem with the establishment Democrats. It's that all we have to do is get rid of Trump and everything is hunky-dory.
It's
for
not.
White people of money.
Well, right. So for the elite class, yeah, they will hope that we go back to sleep. It's just like with these protests. We're on day 7. Like today would be day 8. And what they're saying is, oh, it's okay. You can all go home now. We can't.
We've taken care of you.
Right. We cannot stop. And this is where our neighbors, our neighbors of color, Black, brown, whatever, have been waiting for so long, begging and pleading and losing their lives, waiting for white people to stand up and join them. And now that we actually are, and you can see it on social media where people are starting to, I'm bored with this, let's go back. And that is exactly what this proposal is aimed to do, to get you white people to relax and just say, I'm going to vote blue no matter who. But let's look at what the alternative is. You have Trump saying kill them in the streets, and you have Joe Biden say just shoot them in the leg. Neither of these are acceptable. Neither.
exactly. The people that are bringing you this bill are the people that rigged pretty much the entire primary against Bernie Sanders, right? Because the politician that the majority of Americans on the left want is unacceptable to the establishment. So we're giving you the guy that wrote the crime bill and expecting that you're going to think, oh, everything's going to be better now. Oh, it's great. The crime bill guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, not to be a Debbie Downer, like there's nothing we can do. There absolutely is something we can do. First, stay together. So long as we stay together, we have power, right? Second, and this is where Dawn and I kind of differ a little bit. Dawn is, you know, still working on with Jason Eno on the Dem Enter and Takeover. Fully support that. Absolutely, do what you got to do. And they understand from my experience what happened. There's no damn way I'm going back to the Democratic Party. They are so, to me, in my opinion, they are so morally bankrupt and corrupted by the elite and the oligarchy that, to me, the only way forward is a national major party. And what happens with that is if you have Dem Inter people, good moral people, who are trying to take back the Democratic Party from fascists who have infiltrated it for decades, you have that going on from one side, and then a major national party from the other side who is championing centrist progressive policy, fiscally responsible, socially responsible policy. If you get that from both sides and you give these fascists nowhere to go, it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. However, that is our leverage, because as we see from the primary vote on Tuesday, you're not even guaranteed a vote. So what else do you have? And this is where I am all on board for the Dem exit and building a comprehensive, viable, strong voice to push back in the political arena. In the civil arena, this is where Black Lives Matter, and that cannot stop, because this is all we have. Absolutely. We're never going to have enough money. We're never going to have the military backing us up. All we have is each other, and hold the line. And that's what I think we need to do. So
Yep. Don't give up. Whatever you do, the people, bless their hearts, that are out there putting themselves on the line.
Yeah.
And it's a sad commentary, but the only way that continues if those people continue to put it all on the line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that you know, it's just a reality, right? It's been decades and decades of oppression and redlining and you know, it's going to take a massive movement of people that stay strong, that keep at it, right, on all fronts, right, with our friends, you know, with Ellie and our friends in that direction, and the Vermont Progressive Party, and you know, Nick, the guy, Nick, was it Nick Clark?
Yeah, and Vinay and Ellie and the whole group.
Australia, yeah. Like, I mean, it's going to take a concerted effort on all fronts to make any change at all, because it's going to need organization at this point, right? We're all sitting in the same boat. As I've said before, we just need to start rolling together.
And that's exactly right. So what I want to end with, since we're after the top of the hour, we started a little late, but this whole idea, right? So let's lift this up a little bit before we leave, because this is challenging and depressing and distressful, but I want to end with, what can one person do? Just one person. It's just you sitting at home, or if you have to drive to work or whatever. What can you do? And I want to give you an example that I think is so supremely powerful of what one person can do. Right? So this happened over the weekend, and this is a story about retired Marine Todd Wynn. He's in front of the Utah State Capitol in Salt Lake City. Friday he was out there, temperatures were well over 100 degrees. He's in full military dress with all of his ribbons, his full beautiful uniform on. And he decided to stage a one-man protest. So what he did was stood out there with his sign, and for those who can't read it, the sign that he had is "Justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, countless others. Accountability for failed TPPs and the police abuse." So he had the sign with him, and he stood there for 3 hours. Across his mouth, he put duct tape, and on the duct tape, he wrote, "I can't breathe." And he stood at military attention till his shoes melted into the pavement around him. He didn't speak. The only time he moved was to kneel. And in this particular interview, Yahoo News has this really great write-up. It was somebody who was driving by, a reporter, photographer, who saw him, stopped, and waited till afterwards to speak to him, and got these beautiful pictures of just this one person standing in front of the Capitol quietly in an elongated moment of silence. And it is such a powerful image. So we have seen this time and time again from our Black and brown brothers and sisters. And some of us were so moved by it. We were moved by the picture of Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice was just a baby. Breonna Taylor was at home alone. George Floyd did nothing that most of us haven't done. We have the stats for how many people actually get a counterfeit bill, even from the bank, and don't know it. All of these people, their faces, their lives, whatever, it's been a parade in front of us. But what we haven't seen enough of was somebody like this retired Marine, Todd Wynn, was somebody like General Mattis, was somebody who has white skin, somebody who is just a soccer mom, somebody who is just a retired grandfather. We haven't seen enough of them. So when you ask, what can I do? As an ally, first, challenge the white supremacists wherever you see them. And you have my full permission to go full on Karen on them, because we have been too complicit and too polite. If you are in a public space and somebody seems to be doing something inappropriate to a person of color, your brother and sister, use your white privilege in that moment. Because you can step in and say, "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" Look at your brother and sister and say, "I'm sorry, are they bothering you?" And now you are toe-to-toe equal with that white fascist who has been harassing them. So this is what we need, and you cannot stop. You cannot be bored. You cannot lose focus. It has to start today if you haven't already. And every time you see it, you've got to be there and raise your voice. It's pretty simple.
And as an ally or an advocate, the one thing that I've always understood and heard from the groups of people that I was being an advocate or an ally to was, do not be afraid to ask questions. If you have them, if they come from a good place, if they come from a helpful place, then it's okay to ask questions. I don't know. How do I support you? What is the best way for me as a privileged white person to support you because it comes from a good place. You should never be afraid to ask those questions and listen to the answers.
Yeah, and that's really the key. Listen. And I find it every time I see one of those Karen videos, I am always fascinated by the sense of entitlement that white people in this country in particular seem to have, through osmosis or whatever, there's just a sense of entitlement that is just off the chart. So you as an ally need to recognize wherever that comes from, if you have some of it and you're going to ask somebody for help, no, you shut up and listen. That is your job. You need to sit down, be humble, and not tell them how you think they should speak and act and feel and behave. Right? So this is our moment to practice some humility, which is a grace. So take advantage of it. And for Azalea, more power to you, girl. I know that you are getting intense pressure. I know that your folks in the Trump camp are putting pressure on you. If you need backup, raise your hand. There are a whole lot of people who have no problem going toe-to-toe with fascists and explaining to them how patriots behave. So if you are a progressive out there experiencing some sort of vote shaming, either from the Democrats or the Republicans, raise your hand, because you have family out here who's more than willing to help you. I know I will. I know I can name off 100 other people that I know from all across the country who would love nothing better than to defend you and your right to cast your vote for any damn person you want. So with that, Andy, any final parting words till Wednesday?
Yeah, well, I did have a quick story, but it's already quarter after 10, so I'll save it for Wednesday.
Okay, all right.
Kind of an anecdotal lawyer story that I found rather amusing. And
Well,
so we'll save that for Wednesday.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds great. So on Wednesday, we're going to talk about anecdotal lawyer stories, which
At least at the end.
right. So from all of us here at Progressive Insider, I will say, please go check out our website, progressiveinsider.com. It's on our Facebook page, and it's on our Twitter account. We have some good articles there, and we don't publish opinion pieces. We link to the sources so that you can read it for yourself. In particular, one that's coming out today with the Democratic Party, congress.gov. So the goal is to educate you on how to find the tools and resources that you need to make an informed decision. So there are 3 new articles out there, plus all the videos that we have. We had the last one with our wonderful virologist, Dr. Dylan Burdett, and Dr. Peck. She is a medical doctor, internal specialist. So that was a great informational myth-busting session on COVID, because we definitely want to keep all of our protesters safe. But yeah, just a lot of content and a lot of good things coming out within the next week. So stay tuned, and we really appreciate your support here. So from all of us, thank you and have a wonderful day.
Take care.